internet is a dumpster fire. It is the source of so many of our modern problems. What exactly went wrong? And in Internet for the People, that's kind of the topic that Ben Tarnoff tackles in this book. So he takes us back to the early days of the internet and the vision that people had. There was a lot of hope that it was going to be open and free, but he really traces the reasons why that didn't happen, including the people who were building the internet in the early days. So in the very early days, it was all about defense, military defense purposes, and it was also used in academia. But by the 1990s, the internet was starting to become a lot more privatized. And Tarnoff calls this the online mall period of time. And we find ourselves in that period of time right now. So it's really interesting to think about the policy choices that were made that shaped the internet into this online mall. And consequently, because of this business model, we see organizations that need to adhere to this idea of driving as much profit from the internet as possible. There's an interesting story about Google, and the early days of Google, of course, were ad-free. It was all about academic purposes and this noble idea of making the world more searchable, aggregating all this information. But of course, the investors meant that we had to go in a certain direction and make it monetizable. And that's the kind of story that Tarnoff tells with respect to all of the other companies that followed suit. So there's a lot in this book. There's also a really interesting story at the beginning of the book that talks about the physicality of the internet and this underwater cable that connects North America to Europe through the Atlantic Ocean. It sits at the bottom of the ocean. It's called Maria. I don't know what that stands for, but this cable is owned by Microsoft, Facebook, and the Spanish telecom named Telefonica. And it really makes you think about the fact that the internet has a physicality to it. I mean, sometimes we just think it just arrives, it's just in the air, and yet Tarnoff shows us ways in which that isn't necessarily true. So that was one of the interesting stories in this book. So much to unpack here. The last piece is this idea of fighting for something better. Where do we go with this? If we're not satisfied with this idea that the internet is just going to be this one private entity that is colonized by this handful of monopolies, what can we actually do? And for that, he leaves us with some inspiration. He talks about public libraries, he talks about public media, he talks about many different small experiments that are taking place, cooperatively owned structures, different ways of doing social media. And while we're at the super early days of all of that, he has this call to action to join in, to become part of the people that are running some of these experiments. And so that left me with a lot of hope. So, Internet for the People by Ben Tarnoff, a really good inspirational read.